Distinguished Senator Olubunmi Adetunmbi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Nominee, we have a situation in Nigeria. My name is Olubunmi Adetunmbi from EKITI North. We have a situation in Nigeria where the farmers live in the states. The land for agriculture is in the states. So I want to imagine if you are a federal minister of agriculture, you'll be a minister that don't have farmers. You don't have land. The federal government don't have land. It doesn't control the farmers, yet it has the deepest cause for transforming agriculture. The federal government has the largest stock of fertilizer in this country, year in, year out. And the states are waiting at the mercy of the federal government to have access to fertilizer. Yet, there's no federal government farmer, there's no federal government land. It has the biggest cost for transforming agriculture, more than all the states put together can afford. Now you are the federal minister of agriculture in this scenario. I want you to tell us your analysis of the agricultural sector in terms of the challenges, the problems is spot on and without fault, and nobody here can fault that. But the issue is, how do we get a federal government to transform agriculture where the farmers are in the states, the land is in the states? We have a case of Kwara State here. By the sheer motivation of a sitting governor, he was able to do interesting things. In tourism, we had a governor in Cross River who, by sheer vision and energy, was able to affect tourism with minimal input from the federal government. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the constraints on the way of these state governments actually achieving this kind of vision, most of those constraints are due to externalities that are largely accounted for by federal policies, whether inadequate or constraining. I would like you, Mr. Nominee, to tell us, sitting on the chair of the Minister of Agriculture, how do you intend to motivate the states, the private sector that will drive these value chains, the agricultural industries that will drive these value chains? How do you motivate them to behave differently from the way they are behaving now? It's important that we get to know this. Number two, you are fortunate to have worked with the central bank on this risk-based incentive to agricultural land in Israel. Wonderful initiative. But I would like you to explain to Nigerians how this will work differently from the ineffective agricultural lending scheme, the ACGSF. 27 years old ACGSF, almost 30 years. Only 5 banks are lending under that scheme, the so-called old generation banks. The new generation banks under the liberalized financial sector will not go into agriculture. In those days, I worked under that scheme. The banks were ready to be penalized for not lending into agriculture than actually lending. That's on finance also. We would like to know from you, what is your reform agenda for the Nigerian Agricultural Cooperative and Rural Development Bank? That is the most specialized agricultural lending institution in this country. It has gone in and out of liquidation, and as we speak, is awaiting perhaps a third round of reform. And right now, farmers are not benefiting from that. The last thing I would like to ask from you, Mr. Nominee, is Nigeria has a lot of agricultural research institutes in this country that are producing research outputs that is not turning into agricultural productivity. The whole concept of putting research into use, how do you intend to drive this kind of productivity enhancing research for our agricultural sector in the private sector. Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity.
Distinguished Senator Olubunmi Adetunmbi.
Thank you, Mr. President. To the nominee, my name is Olubunmi Adetunmbi, representing EKITI North. Knowing fully well, Madam, that human population, economic activities, and social services resides in the states, how will you define your role in the management of policy and implementation space between the federal and the state governments without creating conflict, without competing with states, and by making sure that states are in a better position to promote economic activities and deliver social services? Number two, I noticed your activities in the cocoa revitalization. Could you tell us what you think about the state of agricultural research in the country, and how we can promote the culture of putting research into use, so that this country can move away from financing research for the sake of academic publications, what we call research for research sake, into research for private sector-led economic growth, as far as the agricultural sector, where you are very conversant, is concerned. Thank you, Mr. President.
Distinguished Senator Olubunmi Adetunmbi.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for this privilege. Distinguished colleagues, I just want to know what the view of the learned son is on the appropriateness or otherwise of the title of Attorney General of the Federation or Attorney General of the federal government. Because in a constitutional federation of constituent states forming a federation, there ought to be a distinction between the officers of the federation and the officers of the federal government that is managing the federation. It would be nice to hear from you what you consider to be your jurisdiction as an Attorney General, whether of the federal government or of the federation, and what you consider to be the relationship and the overlap of authorities between you as a law officer of the federal government and the Attorney Generals of the state governments. The second clarification I'd like you to make is that in an evolving federation like ours, do you consider yourself a federalist or a unitarist law officer? We would like you to speak to this with some concrete evidences. Thank you very much.
Distinguished Senator Ali Ndume. Senator Olubunmi Adetunmbi. You are against, isn't it? I'm asking those who are against now. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to oppose this motion on a number of grounds. The first ground, sir, and distinguished colleagues, is that on the issue of data, there are nothing less than about 8 to 9 agencies of the federal government as we speak that is generating employment and unemployment data in this country. The NDE, the National Bureau of Statistics, as a matter of fact, conducts annual surveys on employment, on labor in this country, and it is published. The Central Bank of Nigeria has a whole data set on employment and unemployment. The National Planning Commission, the National Manpower Board. Of course, you have state governments and local governments who registered unemployed people in their respective locations. Secondly, Mr. President, there is a current National Statistical Master Plan that is in force and is being funded by the Federal Republic of Nigeria through budgetary provisions, which attempts to link the activities of the National Bureau of Statistics with the State Bureau of Statistics under a reformed statistical master plan. And part of the functions of these agencies that are receiving public funds to function is to collect data. Right now, we could be asking ourselves, what is the National Bureau of Statistics doing in the state of implementation of the statistical plan that is being funded by a central source? Perhaps that will help us to solve the issue of data, not going to the Ministry of Labor and Productivities to set up 36 state offices and 744 fresh offices to collect data that the National Bureau of Statistics is nationally funded and it has offices all over the Federation to do. I think it is a question of the expansion of the productivity of our public resources rather than the replication of functions that are statutorily allocated to established institutions by law of the Federal Republic. Number 3, sir, job centers don't create jobs. At best, it is increasing the cost of governance because we are talking of people whose wages and allowances have to be paid from the public till. Several debates in the last few months have recorded painful realities of a bloated, recurrent expenditure of the federal government, a reason for which various arms of government have been asked to cut down on expenses in order to release money into development. We are trying to increase overheads here by the establishment of these offices without additionality in terms of value addition to the problem of data production and management in this country. Businesses create jobs, not data. Data is used for planning, but it is businesses that produce jobs. How do businesses produce jobs? They need an enabling environment, which is a combination of laws and tariffs and infrastructure. That is what we should be talking about. If we know the cost of this motion to implement Federal Ministry of Labor setting up these offices, I think it will go a longer way to address the issue of energy in this country. Sir, we ask a question. Is the Federal Ministry of Labor and Productivity better at gathering information in my state and in my local government better than my state government and my local government? The answer is probably no. In a federation, Mr. President, we should allow states to perform their functions and encourage local governments to be more effective. This is where the people are living. The unemployed people are not living in the federal government, they are living in local governments. And in this whole arrangement, there is no role, there is no function, there is no responsibility for state government to supply this data, for local government to supply this data, but Abuja is planning to go to Uyo to collect data on unemployed people in Uyo when there's a local government in Uyo, where the Ministry of Labor and Productivity is in a position to call from data from the local government through the state and feed it into the federal government so that they can use it for its planning. This is what we are talking about. Mr. President, the resources of our country is declining. The other sectors of our economy is not adding value. The monoproduct economy that we have, we should use that resources in manners that it can regenerate itself and open up opportunities for other people. For this reason, sir, the Federal Ministry of Labor and Productivity is not in the best position to collect data in faraway Imo State, better than Imo State government and the local government concerned. It is for these reasons that I plead with this distinguished audience that this motion, the arguments of it, though very strong, and it speaks to the problem of employment and the problem of data in this country, but the prayers of this motion